Hi, I'm Andrew Robertson, a psychotherapist and counsellor in Sydney, and I'd like to talk to you about depression, and specifically my theory that depression gets a bit of a rough go in our modern society. Now, in saying that, that probably sounds a bit of a strange thing to say, and I don't want to, for a moment, suggest that depression isn't serious. Depression can be excruciating and even fatal. There's no doubt of that. So, in fact, my suggestion is quite the opposite. I think we need to treat depression with more respect than we generally give it. In this short talk, what I want to suggest to you is that it's very easy in our modern life to treat depression as simply a collection of symptoms that are inconvenient and which interrupt our productive lives, slow us down or even stop us. And so usually the experience is unwelcome, and we treat it as though it's something meaningless and random that just needs to be medicated or survived. And what I want to suggest is that if we're open to it, depression usually has its own gifts, and these are gifts that we can see and receive if we're willing to do so. You know, it's interesting, in mental health, depression is divided into two categories: endogenous and exogenous depression. And basically what these mean is that one depression is understood to be caused by something in your physiology. So the entire reason for your depression is physiological. So for example, there are some diseases that people have which have as an associated symptom depression. Or you might have an acquired brain injury through some road accident or similar physical trauma. And sometimes depression can be a physiological symptom of that situation. That's endogenous depression. Exogenous depression is seen as depression that has been caused by something outside the body, so by your situation, your life circumstances. Now, if you go to a doctor or a mental health professional and you're suffering from symptoms akin to depression, and you share with that professional that you've recently lost a loved one, your depression will make perfect sense in that second category. Quite clearly, this is a case of depression that finds its root in your life circumstances, in your experience. And so we understand that, and in a sense then you're able to experience those feelings as something that has some meaning. You know what they relate to, and it's expected that someone who's grieving the loss of a loved one would go through those feelings. In our busy lives though, if you turn up in that professional's room with the symptoms of depression, and neither you nor they are able to see something very clearly and recent that explains the depression, then it becomes very easy to presume it's endogenous depression, that it's got nothing to do with your life circumstances, that it's just something that's happening in your physiology. And it needn't be due to a brain injury or a disease. It could just be something that's just happening physiologically without any situational reason. And you might be prescribed medication, and you might go on with life just thinking that this is a random suffering that has no meaning, no learnings to gain from it. But when you think about it, how often in your busy life are you able to take the time to open up to what might be going on underneath? There may not be anything hugely obvious like the recent loss of a loved one, but as human beings we have so many aspects and nuances to our experience, to our existence, and our day-to-day lives tend to focus on the very concrete things, the productive lives we want to live and the goals that we have for ourselves and our families and our loved ones. But there are deeper, subtler aspects to our lives as human beings. Think about your life now and go back to some time in your childhood, maybe between 5 and 10, and imagine yourself lying on your back in a nice grassy park, looking up at the sky and dreaming about what your life will be when you're big and grown up. And when you compare those dreams to where you are now, there might be something of a discrepancy. Sometimes we end up with lives very different to those we dreamed of. Sometimes lives that are better, but quite often lives that are not necessarily on track with our dreams, maybe our values. It's very easy to get caught up in the flow of life and find ourselves in jobs, in places, in relationships even, that we might not have choicefully, consciously picked for ourselves. That young part of us, that part of us that wants something better for ourselves, that once dreamed of whatever it might be, that part might be knocking on the door, whispering in our ear, trying to let us know that we've gone a little bit off track. I want to tell you a story that James Hollis tells. James is a psychotherapist and a writer, and his relationship to depression, he explains through a little metaphor, and he says it's like he's walking down the street and someone taps him on the shoulder gently, but he ignores them, and he walks another block or two, and they keep tapping, and he continues to ignore them. Then it becomes a few people poking him, and he continues to ignore them, and eventually it becomes a mob with baseball bats who take him down, and he ends up collapsing in the street. I think that can be a really useful metaphor to look at how depression can work in our lives. It can start with a gentle tap, but I believe that if that really important part of ourselves, whether you want to call it your soul or your subconscious or whatever, that part of us that makes us human, that makes us something more than economic units just, that are part of a machine, that part needs to be heard, wants to be heard and ultimately needs to be heard. And if we don't welcome it, I believe depression is a gift, as unpleasant as it is, that part of us uses to wake us up and to help us reorient, open up to new possibilities, maybe even to leave behind a way of being in the world in order to embrace a new way. Now, as nice as that sounds, leaving behind our way of being in the world is sometimes excruciating. Sometimes it feels like the closest thing to death we can experience without actually dying. So I don't want to pretend for a second that the experience of depression should be pleasant and something that is joyful. It's not. It absolutely is not. It is sometimes terrifying. But what I do want to say is that there are forces within us that are bigger than that part of our brain that just wants us to keep going on the treadmill and to keep achieving goals and being part of an economic machine and a social machine. There are parts of ourselves that want to ask the big questions and want to see us be the very best we can be in the world, whatever that is, for each of us as an individual. And I believe depression can be one of the tools that our psyche uses to hold us to account and to shake us when we need to be shaken. Again, if you or someone you love is experiencing depression, I do not want to make it sound like that's something that is to be celebrated. But it is something that can be deeply meaningful and worthwhile. And if you are depressed, it may be that your experience of that depression will be a little bit more survivable, will be a little bit more manageable if you end up engaging with the possibility that what you're going through isn't meaningless, it isn't random, it actually has a purpose, and that it might take you to a place that's far more meaningful and rich than the place you started in. If you're experiencing depression, the first thing I'd say is it's really important to reach out and get the support you need. And that could be from a therapist, a support group, a trusted friend or family member. And there are resources you can search online as well. But whatever works for you, it's really important to reach out and get that support. The second thing I'd say is that if it's unclear to you why you're experiencing this, then I'd invite you to see if it's possible to open up some space to be curious about what might be going on. There might be some unfinished business or some unresolved issues that you've not been ready to look at before now. And if they're buried in your subconscious, then you'll literally be unaware about what it is that's upsetting you. But if that voice is whispering or hollering in your ear, as the case may be, or that hand is knocking on the door, that voice of depression might be trying to tell you that it is time, and maybe that you're stronger now, and that for some reason you're ready now to look at things that you haven't been ready to look at previously. So there may be for you an opportunity to become curious and ask some difficult questions. And they are difficult questions, but the answers can be immensely rewarding. So if you are in a rough spot at the moment and suffering from depression, I wish you both courage and swift healing.